Hi, welcome to the Indie Wine Podcast, episode 15. I recently sat down with David Teixeira of Lusu Cellars in Berkeley. We sat in his winery on Camellia Street, which is somewhat of a legendary space for Berkeley wineries, and we discussed it a bit in the episode. David is really proud of his Portuguese heritage and growing up in California also, and they both greatly influence his winemaking thoughts and winemaking practices. His family has been making wine on varying scales for generations. I hope you enjoy the conversation. Here we go.
I grew up in Antioch. My family came from Portugal, but growing up out there, we very much kept a lot of the Portuguese traditions alive. So that was suburban / ag California growing up, like big Ford trucks and like brand new track homes.
Okay.
Like high school was it was interesting, like cowboys and like I like Tupac and whatnot was big. So it was a very contrasting juxtaposition. But anyway, like in that, almost all of my mom's side of the family ended up there. A lot of growing up was keeping a lot of the traditions alive. So we made wine every year, and there's a good community of Portuguese growers out there and old Italian growers, and my uncle was very popular, so he would know who sold or who didn't sell all their grapes, and we would go there and an excuse to have a barbecue, and I was free labor, so
Nice. Yeah.
I was there for the food mostly. Growing up, that was growing up basically. And then as I got older, kind of got more curious about things and started reading a little bit, and kept asking, like, why are we doing this and why are we doing that?
Mm-hmm.
My dad or my uncles would kind of give me, well, this is what we do. And that was the answer for everything. So I was like, well, yeah, but why?
And because somebody said we do 100 years ago.
Yeah, exactly. So it was something I wanted to learn in the back of my head. Like, why are these traditions, why are we doing these traditions in this way, specifically involving wine? Mm-hmm. And after college, I was lucky enough to take up an internship at the building we're in, for a winery called Eno Wines. And he was Sasha was the owner of that, and just an awesome guy to this day. And he taught me a lot, and I was lucky enough beyond that to work for a lot of small producers that gave me a lot of time in kind of curating knowledge and experience, and just showing me the ropes in a sense. And that's kind of my introduction to the wine business.
So you grew up with wine around you as a child and everything. And
it was food basically,
mm-hmm.
in a sense. Like, it was kind of a shocker to be in the industry like the first couple of years and have wine be this really fancy thing, because it was always just a beverage that would be on hand that mm-hmm. you, like, anybody that came to your house, it's like, hey, I made this bottle, you should try my wine, kind of mm-hmm. a thing. And like, oh yeah, like, my grandma's preserves would at some point come out or something. Like, there's a lot of like just produced things that my parents live in a suburban home, but I swear if you can grow it, they're doing it. Like, they mm-hmm. have every fruit tree you could imagine and like everything else. So growing up, it was always kind of a curated environment as far as like what we were eating. And there was always some type of year that had a process to it. A
lot of canning going on.
Some of it, canning or like some pickling. It was cool. It's kind of informed how I think a lot of my interests going in adulthood, and like what I've tried to do with Lusu. I have a pretty gold filtered nostalgia for a lot of things. And it's part of what influences the varietals I choose, and some of the vineyards even. but mostly the varietals and the methodology that I bring to it.
Mm-hmm.
Lusu for me was always meant to pay homage on like two levels. There was like the personal, revolving my family and the Portuguese side, and then kind of a more, we are Californian, everybody's kind of coming out here, everything's kind of under this sun in a sense, like new here, like relatively. I mean, you know, if you can talk about, I mean, how long's wine been here? Like 160, 70 years, around there.
Yeah.
So, but relative to other parts of the world,
short period of time.
Babies. So, kind of trying to any vintage, like take the pulse of something and see what that conversation can be in a sense. And specifically, like, so the personal would be like the Portuguese winemaking techniques. Portugal's big, so there's a lot of variety I can pull from. In my family, since they're from the island of Madeira, it's like one technique. So it's like we were making one wine, and it's kind of a hard thing. Like there's Madeira wine that like people know, and then there's like the country wine out there that would be what my family made. And of the concepts people might know, it would be somewhere between like a Jura, like a Chardonnay from the Jura, and a rosé from anywhere else.
Okay.
So it's like a semi-oxidated like rosé that, depending on what time of year you're tasting it, like is on that spectrum of like my dad still makes wine. He's 84, and he started blending in some table grapes, so the alcohol has gone down quite a bit, but it's picked sweet and like or like kind of a higher, I'd say it's in the 13% alcohols for a rosé. And like when you have it, it's like super fresh through February, and then as it gets closer to summer, like you just start getting these nuttier and nuttier, which can be good sometimes, especially with some of the barbecues we do and whatnot. But beyond that, there was like that tradition, and then a lot of the other ones that when I was living in Portugal, I got introduced to, and it's kind of introducing some of those techniques, which I don't believe I'm doing anything new under the sun. Like these techniques have been around forever, but I'm trying to introduce them to historically relevant California varietals. So like a Vinho Verde style that I do with like a Zinfandel Rosé or a Pinot Gris, or hopefully if it comes through a Chenin Blanc this year, which I've been trying to do for a while. Or like my Zin, I dehydrate the stems, which I know they do sometimes in like the Alentejo region. For different, I think it's a different reason they do it there. But I wanted to introduce something to Zinfandel that would kind of stabilize the pigment.
So you're destemming
and drying that over 5 days. And then they're all native ferments. So by the time that ferment goes off, like kind of putting them back in to kind of hit the beginning and stabilize some of the color pigments, and kind of adds a black tea characteristic as well. Anyway, I can get back into that later, but there's other things I tried to do with that too. But those kind of techniques, and I do like a California Madeira that's a straight up homage to where my parents came from, but kind of doing all that to include the personal, but kind of see like, you know, this is what California's done for years. Zinfandel, Pinot Gris from, 60s, 70s, all these kind of varietals that have hung out for a while, or like, now I do a Petit Syrah, but it only had like 4 days of skin contact to not have that kind of, super tannin expression. That's not a Portuguese technique, but just trying to play with historical norms in that sense, of execution on some of these varietals. That's kind of the impetus and kind of evolving ethos of Lusu and what I've tried to do with it.
Did Lusu just start as a kind of a side project while you were working at Eno, or did it evolve in a
I was working for a winery in Paso Robles called Eden Canyon. And I was doing a lot of different hats for them. They were a small winery, so it was like sales and assistant winemaker and whatnot. And I was like, hey, we're not using that corner of the cellar. And in a very like endearing way, I was like, I know you're not giving me a bonus this year. So can I just like, make a couple barrels and kind of go through that way, making some extra cash.
Yeah.
And that was right around the time I had my freak out of like, oh my God, I'm never going to make any money in the wine business. And like, I was just trying to like, where's my future in this? And like, how do you make a life in this? And so that's how Lusu started, was kind of that impetus of like, I can do a little bit and like, this would be cool and fun. And so for 4.5 years, it was me just finding interesting vineyards to work with and kind of being like, I really have a passion for Zinfandel. So Zinfandel and Carignan, a little bit of Sangiovese, and then Rhones were what I started making. And I was only doing like 100 to 200 cases. For those, it like moved up to 250 by like the 4th or 5th year.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was like, all right, well, the reception's been positive overall. And I feel like not going into it with like more of an attitude of like, hey, this is cool. This is something I really want to work with and kind of evolve in particular ways. And then realizing like, oh, I really want to evolve this in like, and see where these kind of conversations evolve, like vintage to vintage. Especially with the Zin, to be honest, like Zinfandel's kind of, I've had a very reflective year this year on like where the winery's at and everything. And Zinfandel's been at the core of it. And in my life, like that's what my family made out in Contra Costa. And what I've made all these years, and like just the different historical vineyard sites, and then just the process of making Zin and how vintage to vintage it can express itself. I think part of that obsession is it's not a popular grape. Like it kind of had its heyday.
Yeah.
And now it's kind of maybe the grandpa grape or the dad grape, but like, I think dads are at Pinots now. And like, grandpa was probably at a Zin cab level back in the day. And just trying to just kind of being obsessed with how, as a varietal in California, it's massively nostalgic to this state, and has this historical presence, but I don't feel like that history is done. Like it still kind of has more, like, especially with kind of a lot of the trends that have set themselves up within the natural wine community, or just like in the industry in general, with like a lighter touch and lighter expressions of things. Like I think Zinfandel, because it was so famous for, white Zin or
White Zin or 16%.
Or 16% high octane, high kind of impact stuff. The kind of 1970s Gamay, like Beaujolais, or like just fun expressions in a different way.
Yeah.
Could go forward.
Yeah, it's had a lot of disrespect, I think, over the years, kind of. Or it's still kind of the underdog a little bit.
I remember being in DC trying to sell wine, and it was like interesting to talk to different shop owners, and like they're like, yeah, like this is really cool, we like what you're doing, but like some of our customers are like, they're asking for white Zin, or they're asking for like the heavy, and I was mostly white Zin there, at least when I was there. Now, I think DC's changed a lot since I had a distributor there, and then New York was more like, yeah, like depending on the restaurant that we were at, or shop, it, something more like a Ridge or that more claret style was kind of what the market kind of did. So every part of the country was kind of got this different take on this varietal and what it does. And like Florida seems like it was, the high octane stuff.
Okay.
And I was just kind of like soul searching on Zin, like where can I, where does this middle ground that I seem to occupy? Because mine is solidly like medium plus body. Yeah. And more and more influence with some carbonic influence and the other varietals I put in. So like that Zin character is not front and center, cranberry, raspberry, jam kind of a thing.
Yeah. What are the other grapes that you're tending to add to it? Kind of the usual.
More and more Mourvedre.
Okay.
It's 25% Mourvedre at this point, or pretty close to 25%. There's there used to be more Carignan in the vineyard, but that ended with a couple droughts. So there's a little Carignan and a little Petit Syrah that's just mixed in, or from the neighbor's vineyard.
Okay.
And the 70 to 75% of it's Zinfandel, which half is carbonic.
Are you co-fermenting everything together?
The non-carbonic half, with all the other varietals, is co-fermented, and the carbonic half is separate.
Okay.
Yeah.
So at the beginning, you were mostly focused on reds, or were you making any white wines at that time?
No,
also?
whites. I made orange wine. I've been around for longer than people realize. Like 2010 was the first vintage.
Yeah.
But I was making almost nothing, so I don't know if you can count it. But yeah, I was making, like, I did a couple of vintages of Pinot Gris orange wine, and then since 2013 and ending this last year, I was doing Grenache Blanc as an orange wine.
Okay.
So that was, for the longest time, my whites. And then I think more and more I've been getting into whites. That part of that had to do with the equipment I had. Like, everything here has been built on what came before, in a sense, like financially speaking. Like those 100 cases, I never took any money from that, and that financed, like, every year was put into the bank, and
rolling it over.
Yeah, like 1 year I bought the press, 1 year I bought other pieces of the forklift, just little by little. And the chiller didn't happen until way later. And I knew I wanted my white wine to have a very particular execution, and I needed the cooling system involved in that. So yeah, there's Bill Naylor is one of my longtime growers. There's two primary growers I get to work with. One of them is Barbara Huckstead in Lodi. It's the only vineyard I get anything from in Lodi. And then the majority of my production comes from El Dorado, and Bill Naylor's my source for that. He has a property where he does some cool Italian stuff. But for the longest time, he was farming a very awesome couple who used to own Single Leaf Vineyard. It's right next to Cedarville, which more people are familiar with. Yeah, out in Fairplay, and that was the Zin I was making from up there. And yeah, so that is what was the question?
Do you like those high elevation sites like in El Dorado?
Yeah, El Dorado attracted me for the high elevation expression of otherwise warm climates, just because their diurnals are pretty extreme. Or actually, no, not extreme, but good enough where you get that mountain cooling influence, as the converse to Paso, where it's a lot of eastern direction of wind, coastal winds cooling things off. The El Dorado's the opposite of westward, downward elevation cool off. And I really liked the soils there being mostly like a mix of decomposed volcanic and granite soils with some loam on top. Yeah. And honestly, the vibe on top of it, like it's changing now, but I mean, when I started in 2010 going up there, it was like it reminded me of like Contra Costa back in the day. It was very kind of, this is the Wild West of viticulture. Like there's weeds and there's, my grower is not a huge, like he'll mow. When I started, he was at the very beginnings of kind of converting to more organic practices. And we were able to work. The other attractive part was we were able to work together as far as like, hey, could you maybe like give me this part of the block that would make it equipment wise easy for you to just stop and like not do whatever on this section and like kind of cater some of the farming to what I wanted.
Yeah, that's great. You were able to work with them.
Yeah. And so for all those reasons, that was kind of the attraction of El Dorado, and continues to be. Bill's kind of handing over his business to a new generation of farmers, and it's kind of continuing the relationship. So going back to the white wine question, I started to get access to some older vineyard sites there, and old being relative to there, like 1970s, not like 100-year-old vine stuff, but the Pinot Gris I make is from Oakstone Vineyard out there, which was historically one of the first kind of driving vineyards in the area. There was a really cool couple that had it. They just sold it to another nice couple. It was very new. I think this is their second harvest this year at the property. And the Pinot Gris from there was just kind of very, it's not quite head trained, but it was that kind of like converted from head trained into a trellising system.
Okay. So a little bit wild.
Yeah. There's a savage edge to it. So that attracted me. The age of the vines attracted me because they planted that back in the early 80s. I think that was a couple years.
Okay. So relatively old for that.
For white. And so that is when I started doing the Vignes Verdes style Pinot Gris. And that's besides some forays into Italian varietals, I can't figure out why I keep saying yes to. Like, they're great, they're fun, but I'm like, aren't I supposed to be like focused on old California? And all of a sudden I'm making Vermentino. Like,
what are some of the techniques that you use to make that the Vino Verde style?
Gets fully fermented, and then when it's going, or almost fully fermented, like basically when it gets to like 1 bar or less, I transfer it into a bright tank, and it gets sealed off.
Okay.
And just held there until it can settle for a little while, and then after it got racked into that tank and settles, and then gets bottled pretty quickly.
Okay. Keep that little bit of sparkle to it.
It doesn't have a ton. I've kind of messed around with it. I mean, to me, and it's an ironic execution because like the Vinho Verde area of Portugal hates that style. Like they do really nice, like still white wines from really cool varietals that don't come here varietally all the time. Usually it's a blend. But that's what we get here is like, the Casal Garcia and all the others that are like force carbonated and like kind of put through the distribution mill in a sense. So this is just kind of that, but with Pinot Gris instead of Loureiro or Rinto or any of the other Portuguese varietals. It's kind of meant to be that fun, almost irreverent take on a very geeky Portuguese thing.
Yeah, a little bit of a wink to it.
Yeah, a little bit of a wink. But yeah, so whites, been getting more into those, just kind of saying yes to anything that excites me, that kind of benefits a grower in a sense. So the Vermentino being the main one of that. For a while, I was trying to introduce Roussan. I was trying to work with this vineyard in El Dorado that is super high elevation and gets a lot of frost damage. I had to give up on that. That just got decimated, where I was like, I can't only produce a barrel of this. But it's just been a continual search. So, which hopefully is culminating in the Lodi vineyard, Barbara. I knew her from 2008 or 7 when I was working for a couple other wineries. And we were getting her Petit Verdot. And I was like, wow, this seems like a cool property. It's in the Macalmy region of Lodi, and it's trellised to your head. The fruit zone is like above your eyeballs.
Oh, wow.
So and they did that in part because I think back in the day, something about frost. I can't remember what she said, but it's really high. To the point where like some of the pickers like carry around stools to like reach it, depending on how tall you are. Okay. Like I can walk almost like perfectly standing up and under the canopy. It's a quad system. So, and they've kept that trellising system to this day. But anyway, she took out some of her Petit Verdot and transplanted it to, we were trying to find Loureiro, ended up not being able to find feed stock on that. And so she planted a Rinto for me. So the the orange wine program is going to switch to Orintu. And that'll be the beginning of me actually. I've always been a little intimidated to do Portuguese varietals in California. I feel like for various reasons, Portugal's does it well and for a reason, and those varietals do well there. And I was having a hard time, especially with like organic practices or sustainable, finding sources that I wanted to work with Portuguese varietals. So I'm still searching for a red. My fantasy, probably not going to happen, is to work with Touriga Francesca here in California. But that's kind of one of the directions I want to take the winery in, and evolve things from that.
So more Portuguese varieties.
Along juxtaposed next to the older California. So kind of doing the Zinfandel and then having it'll probably be Touriga Nacional that I can actually source just because it's a more common varietal. But having that next to it and having that be the reds that I do, and then the whites being the Vinho Verde style, hopefully Chenin this year, and orange wine of the Orintu. And there's going back to the obsession I have with Zinfandel, you can kind of do a 3-course meal with Zin at this winery a lot. So I do the Vinho Verde style rosé, the Zinfandel field blend, and then it's not Portuguese, but kind of Lambrusco style red sparkling Zinfandel from the El Dorado sites. And that's the current expressions that I'm trying to kind of research and evolve vintage to vintage and see if people like it.
What gets you excited about a vineyard to potentially work with?
Usually my vibe with the grower after it gets to that point, but before that point, it's what I've tasted other people have or do. Or if I'm looking for a particular varietal, like more and more, I have the people I want to work with year to year. I'm open to more, but my growers, I love them. They treat me amazingly well. And so varietals are kind of, and how they're made are the sites that I'm kind of looking for. So like Chenin, kind of harking back to the Delta, growing up there, that'll be where I'm looking for Chenin, in a sense.
It's a good place to find it. There.
And if I do any other things, it'll always have to have a connection like that. Either like, oh wow, I really liked what that guy did with that, and I want to try and do something similar, or this, something like that, or I want to work with her or whatever.
Have to have like the personal connection.
Right now, it's more just focused on the kind of retro California varietals, and not looking to expand into too many new things besides like maybe pick up a Touriga Nacional vineyard and solidify a Chenin relationship.
How else do you think your Portuguese heritage influences your winemaking?
That's a good question. On the literal level, it's mostly technique based stuff. Like I'm kind of a geek on old wine books, so I'll read that, or when I'm in Portugal, honestly, I'll go to the library, and a lot of them have these out of date, like 1970s, academic texts where, like Piquet had its day. I don't know I don't know how in vogue it still is, but, like I remember reading about that and tempting it horribly. In the Portuguese sense, we call it IWP, and, like reading about stuff like that around here I hadn't even heard of or been exposed to like 10 years ago. So every time I go back, I try and just pick up like some old book that the wine, I don't want to say it's not just business, but like the culture of wine there is not quite as written as here. Like I think it's just lived there. And so it's more of an oral historical kind of a thing. Like it's the environment you're in. It's what you get exposed to, what in the ways that people talk about it there. Here, I feel like there's been so much of a self-education in any point of our history in the wine community here, where, either it's Roan Rangers where, we're literally exchanging people and ideas in that sense of like winemakers crossing, going there and coming here and whatnot. So it's harder to get that evolution going. But on the more personal level, it's just, so my academic history is philosophy.
Okay.
Lo and behold, why I figured, what do you do with that? So you end up in the wine business. But I feel like it connects with the Portuguese side, just in the sense of that's kind of one of the guiding ethoses of how I view the winery's existence and kind of the purpose of what I'm trying to make of it. And it's kind of rationalizing where certain evolutions could go and just being part of that dialogue, like kind of in the sense of like, and I'm not equating myself to this at all, but like when you think about like everything that influenced like a Jackson Pollock being made, you went from hyper realism to, I might get this wrong, but like impressionism to maybe cubism, and, eventually ending up at where Jackson Pollock kind of made his stuff. And then the evolution from there to now in art. Like I feel like that exists in the wine community. Like what was, or food in a sense, like what was popular in the 60s as like good high-end wine, I don't think is really like, that's the golden patina of nostalgia. Like, I don't know if we would really consider like where that would fit in our hierarchy of like good wine and bad wine, as subjective as that is these days.
Yeah.
And kind of just trying to take that historical context and look at how to evolve that or how to contribute to that in my own way, of trying to maybe, Carbonic's not new with Zinfandel, but maintaining the field blend aspect of it and putting the dehydrated stems in it, kind of trying to push some of that conversation.
Yeah, some twists on it.
And like where I played texturally with some of my wines, especially the reds, moving them more fresh, more chillable, which I've enjoyed exploring, but I kind of felt like I went a little too far and wanting to kind of maintain it's hard because these terms are so subjective. And I feel like when people hear them, they're like, oh, you're talking about a really big wine and I'm not going to want that. But it's like, no, I don't. Just like having a conversation in the sense of tannin and being like, okay, where to push some sensations of tannin and where to like maybe step off in other senses. I know those are really vague terms, but I feel like with the push to so many carbonic wines and chillable reds, like you kind of, a lot of these tannins sometimes have come from either underripe fruit in a sense, with some of the skin tannin, or in some sense just aggressive stem qualities that I feel like in the course of Zinfandel can be a little getting in the way of what the varietal is trying to say, and trying to express some of its own natural tannins a little more to get a slightly more complete wine expression, instead of kind of like a glue light in a sense, not like like you can quaff it but still kind of have it hold up to maybe some more robust food or something else. Yeah.
Do you think that has to do with kind of the uneven ripening of Zin?
Or in that particular case, yeah. And I mean, going back to the whole, I don't get on many soapboxes, but I just feel like as drinkers and what we like, and generationally speaking, we just have these preferences that change. Kind of going with, I had a really interesting conversation with the old buyer for Mission Wine and Cheese, and he was like, yeah, Pinot Noir is like the dad wine. And I was like, oh, I never thought of it that way. Like, enough years have gone by, and Pinot was a powerhouse in the early 2000s. It's like, those are the dads.
Yeah.
And like the 90s and early 2000s, that was the, Rosenblum, or the, like, I mean, you name it, like, Silver Oak or whatever, like those expressions of Cab and Zin, and like, maybe a little Pinot, but like more the Costa Brown style of Pinot Noir. And how nowadays you have the entire neighborhood that I'm in, and like, Dunkin' a Goat and Brock and everyone here, and or Two Shepherds or any number of wineries nowadays. And there's this like leaner, brighter, carbonic-y, like super fun and progressing the dialogue of wine in a different way than has been emphasized in the past 20, maybe 30 years. And trying to naturally see that and like be like, okay, well, what's the next point in this conversation? And to me, a little bit of tannin might be that next point, and like trying to explore like, yeah, we definitely did too much in the aughts and like went a little overboard. But, now do we want to maybe introduce a little bit back to emphasize certain flavor components or just food pairings or whatever? Like, it just seems like a element that has been neglected.
Just finding that kind of balance
or
like bringing it back to the center.
I'm struggling
a touch.
It's something that I'm still working out in my head. Where, do we want to have any particular kind of wine define a decade? Because now I feel like you almost can't say that. There's all these legacy wineries that have bigger, higher octane offerings, and then kind of the new school that has come out that I wouldn't say is the antithesis to that, but it's a different dialogue and a different set of what is defined as good. So expressing these terms in like, this is good and this is bad is a little difficult. I'm a moderate in most senses, so it's I'm somewhere in between in all of that. Which I guess could change the conversation to like, I would very much, the driving forces have always been like, if my grandfather didn't do it, I don't want to do it. But at the same time, I don't want to come out with shitty wine. So like historically relevant norms of what we've kind of fought pretty hard to eliminate in the industry on a longer term, like Pascal level of evolution. I don't want to disregard. Like Brett sucks. Like a little bit can be this like serendipitous, amazing expression in a Syrah. And then, but when you didn't invite it in and it's there, it's like, I don't want that. And so just having that kind of, happy medium of like not having obvious flaws, but also kind of trying to do a fresher expression of some of these vineyards that have otherwise like I don't think I am anymore, but I used to be the youngest winemaker working with like a lot of the vineyards in El Dorado that I was sourcing from. Like everybody else that was getting the fruit was like, 20 years into their careers, or the wineries were 30 years old or whatever.
Yes, you were the kid.
I was the kid. Yeah. Now there's a lot more salt in the in the hairline. But but still trying to, at least in my own way, see how I can evolve it.
Can you tell me about the Madeira style wine that you made?
That I'll start off with saying it's been received positively, which was my biggest, oh shit, like I'm doing everything you're not supposed to do to a wine. Will people like this? So that was a passion play. I started that in 2011 or 2012. I can't remember now. And I knew that I wanted to make it in a style that wasn't dominant here. And Cercial was where I kind of ended up. There were other ones.
If that's where you were kind of aiming for.
Mostly because I like the slightly, sweet, but the relatively drier than like a Malmsey or some other style. And for better or worse, it was one of the styles that we didn't have the varietal for here. So there's like 10 different varietals in it, and each vintage, like 1 or 2 would be added to kind of, and made in a different way to push it in a particular direction. And so it's meant to be a direct homage to the Cercials from Madeira, but it's just got the smorgasbord of California white in it, to be honest. It's like any, from Rhones to Bordeaux to Loire whites. It's got, I think it's even got some Italian stuff.
Yeah. Okay.
It's first bottling was 2019.
Okay.
It's this weird timeline with the pandemic.
Yeah,
it's like, how many years ago really was
lost.
that? Yeah.
It's easy to forget where you're at.
Yeah. But the Madeira, it's got those varietals in it and is in a Social style and was, I want to say 7 to 8 years outside here in Berkeley, where the winery is. And it doesn't honestly get hot enough here. So even though it was outside and you could tell the effects of getting sucked into the wood and out of the wood were happening. And it had this really interesting texture it was in a puncheon, an old puncheon. And you could definitely get not an oak, like straight out flavor, but like a aged in oak flavor of very neutral. But you could just tell the aging had happened that way. And the expression is like a very reserved Madeira in the sense that it didn't actually get cooked. Like it's not subtropical here, so it's
I mean you're half mile from the
from
the bay.
We're in June and it's pretty much overcast here right now with a bunch of fog, so it's hard to push some of the quote unquote Madeirized flavors in that temperature. So I've since moved it to a friend's winery out in Contra Costa. Okay. So it's experiencing all the glories of warmth and heat. And has grown to 2 puncheons. I had it in 4 barrels and then I had one of those barrels go bad and I was like, never again. So it gets hit pretty hard with a higher level of brandy in the beginning and then goes into its aging, and then right before it's aging I'll take some the year before I'll take some of the white almost dry white, whatever level of sugar I'm trying to add in, and then push it in to a lot that I've separated before I add the new year's addition to it.
Yeah. So it's kind of a Cellars.
Oh, it's definitely a bastardized Cellars. Like it's 2 barrels, but it's not a. Yeah, I'm on a small scale, so it's as Cellars as I can get. And that's been surprisingly. I mean, it's a hand sell. Like people hear California Madeira, it's like, first of all, what do you even call it legally? So my best, thumb in the mouth kind of I don't think that's the expression, whatever the expression is. I call it a mad era.
Right.
So I'm not that funny, but dad jokes or something I'm decent at.
Yeah. Point comes across.
Yeah.
What it is. So.
But yeah, that's the Madeira. And it's kind of been fun because I did a port for a while. It was a cross between if you can say this, it was a cross between a tawny and a ruby, fortified later. So I'd say it's about half the normal RS. Didn't hit that syrupy texture and tasty, but it was my even though it was aged 3 years, that was my first dessert wine, that I knew I could get to market a little quicker than the Madeira. And it was interesting because it got me thinking about making the dessert wine for myself, got me thinking about them more. And when I'm out tasting, I feel like a lot of what judges dessert wines is just the sugar level. And I knew I didn't want that to be the defining edge of what my dessert wines were, because I feel like it's just this ignored category that's in some circles poo-pooed, and in others, obviously we all Sauternes and vintage port and all that. There's a great love affair with that and that legacy from those regions, but we don't have that in California. We kind of have Angelica and late harvest is Infidel. And both of those, sweet is a very dominating part of. so kind of doing something here that I felt like was Californian and expressed that, but held a different standard of what it defined as good.
Did you make the port with the port varieties, or were you using other grapes?
Yes. It goes along with the theme. It was half Suzhou and half Zinfandel.
Okay.
So it was my Cali Porto mix.
Yeah, a mashup.
Yeah. Every once in a while I do like a Suzhou table wine or include it in a blend. And so it just alternated, like, do I add Zin this year or do I add Suzhou? Okay. And that was my port.
How did you come to find yourself working in this space? Because I feel like this is it's kind of a legendary West Berkeley wine space. There's been a lot of wineries in this building previously, right?
Yeah, there's a big legacy of winemakers behind this space, and it's I've had the pleasure of knowing a lot of them, and like Steve Edmonds was here back in the 80s, and this really awesome guy called Tom Leaf had Grape Leaf Cellars here in the 90s. There's a few I'm missing. The owner of the building started what was it, Chateau Camellia. We're on Camellia Street with his dad, and then he kind of played out his interest in the wine business, and then Steve took over. And then fast forward to Sasha in the aughts, who I think took directly over from Tom Leaf. Okay. And it's just this wild kind of baton that's been kicked down the road that has been really cool. Seeing either old pictures on how people organize the space and being like, oh yeah, I should do that. Or like just tasting the wines of what came out of here. So like there's a 100-year-old home next to us with an amazing family, but they rebuilt that here. That used to be a vineyard that grew Pinot back in the, I don't know, 70s, I think, which I actually got to try.
Okay. I've heard a little bit about that story.
There's a bottle floating around here somewhere that is not drinkable. Like I think the cork dried out many years ago, but it's still cool with the old label. But yeah, it was not global warming back then, so it was a very lean Pinot. But yeah, that was the owner of the old owner of the building, Travis Freder. He made that with his dad, I think. And I came here because my first internship was here. I went to Cal, graduated with a philosophy degree, and then freaked out. I was like, wait, I don't want to be a lawyer, and I don't want to pursue academia anymore. So what now? So it was kind of fulfilling a promise to myself to like kind of dive into wine and learn a little bit more and answer some questions I had about how my family made wine, and ended up donning a tie because I thought that's what you did for interviews, and like a nice slacks and shirt, and walking into this interview and seeing the guy leave before me and being like, oh, I am so overdressed for this. But I actually was a second intern hired that year. I think the only reason I impressed him was because I was pretty excited to get the job and do it. And he kind of, I don't know, he saw something in me. The primary guy was a brewer that was taking a hiatus from his brewing days. I don't know if you know Faction Brewing. He was, it was right before Faction opened up. He's like, I want to, this is my one chance to kind of make some wine and like do something other than beer for a little bit. So that was an awesome harvest. I was like, Roger was around, so it was like something great was on tap every week, and that's what brought me to this building, was that internship and like driving up to Dry Creek every couple weeks and picking up something really awesome and new. And then I stopped working for Sasha somewhere before 2010 and was working down in Paso. And then right around 2014, Sasha was splitting the space with another winery,
Okay.
Brock Cellars,
Right.
who's around the corner, who's obviously expanded a ton, and he was moving out, so I took over his half of the space, and then kept going from there. Yeah.
How has this area around you changed since you've been in this space?
Massively. I mean, we've like gone from like high speed
over here.
Yeah. It used to be like, I remember bottling one time for Eno, and there was like a high speed cop chase. There was a drug house across the street.
Okay.
Until like, yeah, it was nuts. Like it was this tiny bottling line that was in a horse trailer, and we're all like sitting there, you know, pounding away at some bottles, and all of a sudden, like many cop cars and the guy in running, going at like 60 down a basically residential street. To like now there's, you know, Whole Foods and 7 wineries. Yeah. So it's, I mean, it definitely has expanded organically. Like Brock left here, and then, I might be wrong, but I think Hammerling used to work for Brock. So they expanded from there. And then Wind Chaser, who used to be in the neighborhood, he used to work for Donkey and a Goat. And then Jason of Vinca Minor, he just moved to the neighborhood, but for a little while, it was like these kind of organic offshoots of different people just kind of growing in their careers. And now there's a new winery that's on Gilman. I can't remember the name at the moment, but they're going to open in a couple months, I think.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's been a huge, really cool growth in the neighborhood. And they're doing some really cool block parties now, really building a community out here. Yeah.
That's awesome. You've made cider a couple vintages.
Oh yeah.
Also, right?
Yeah. That was it's still a thing I do, kind of. It's a ton of work.
Is it?
It's like, I mean, it's heavy loaded on the food processing end, which I mean, this is a vocal media, so you can't see how small this place is, but it's very small. It's a glorified, like, some apartments are bigger than this winery. Yeah. And I had memories of my uncle, who I met for the first time, I don't know, in my 20s. A lot of my family ended up in Venezuela, and we were having a impromptu family reunion back in Portugal. And it was my direct nuclear family didn't really have a cider. Like, we didn't drink it, we didn't make it. Okay. But my uncle was like, hey, like, you know, let's go do something. And so we went to a couple villages that are like 30 minutes from my dad's village. And we just started going bar to bar, and he's like, hey, this place is known for this. And so every time I saw him after that, we'd like go and have cider. And as I tried cider here, I was like, man, I'm never really tasting. This was before cider kind of hit. There's a lot of awesome cider now. But I was like, I want to make what I tasted in Madeira, which was like a more drier halfway point between like a Normandy and maybe a Basque style. Okay. Like some of the very light influences of the funk of like a Basque, but more that kind of yeasty, almost champagne like Normandy styles of cider. And I was just like, I feel like this is part of my heritage I want to explore, and it's for shits and giggles, basically. Okay. So I've really loved it, but did not realize, and part of it's the quality of equipment I have. I'm at a pretty small scale, but it was like 1 ton, 6 hours of processing just to get through the grinder stage, not even the pressing. And I was like, oh my God, this is taking forever. Like, so kind of evolving that to just trying to get this cider fermented and carbonated to what I'm doing now, which is, it was Newtown Pippins I was able to source, which are an awesome, I love the acid in them. But Gravensteins just have this, I think, amazing flavor. They have the acid. And I wanted, as good as what I had on the island was, part of my honeymoon on a more going back to the personal, was spent in Normandy. And that was like my aha, like big light bulb, like, maybe it was everything else that was going on that was super positive, but it was, that was like, oh my God, I want more of this. And diving intellectually into that on just like, what do they do? How do they do it? And realizing that I can't do that. I'm not going to Kiev here. I do not have the facilities and it does not get cold enough. But wanting some of those more champagne-like autolyzed flavors from the yeast cells, to where like the new ciders I'm making that are still aging will be like bottle aged for extended periods of time on lees and disgorged and more in a champagne production. They won't have the tannin that the French ciders do or the Portuguese ones do, just because we don't have those varietals here. But I think it'll be kind of a cool expression of technique to terroir marriage kind of a thing. And that's kind of the origin story of that interest. If you couldn't tell by the way I talk, I'm very tangential. So the interests have been just as tangential. Cider and Amaros kind of hit at the same time. And going back to that kind of philosophy kind of base, to me, it just feels good when there's layers to it. So the Amaro I'm making is one vineyard, and it was the original idea before life got involved was like all the botanicals would be from that area. So the Lodi vineyard, Barbara has, which I just have to put a little elbow to Barbara. She is the sweetest person. She's originally from the Midwest. They grow so many fruits on that vineyard, like persimmons and pomegranates and many others. And she doesn't eat fruit. And I just love the irony of that. So I was like, what can I do with all this stuff you're not using? I've tried to take like different things from that. So walnuts was one of them. So it's kind of a Nonino influence type Amaro. But the base wine is Zinfandel, and the St. George was kind enough to distill the Zinfandel. So the fortifying brandy is the wine. So until I figured out that there isn't enough botanicals to really make enough from there, just source wise, it was all going to be from that one vineyard. So now I've kind of got 100-mile radius around there that I'm sourcing a few other fennel ingredients and whatnot to kind of fill in the holes. But that's been the new kind of exploration. Which I'm hoping another year and I can release that. But anything that kind of dives into what we grow in California is kind of what I focus on the wine, but like the Amaros, the ciders and all that, I feel like it's all part of one conversation of just looking at what we've done and seeing if doing it in a slightly different way is something people would like or not. Really what I hope people walk away from when either they hold a bottle in their hands or visit the winery here on Saturdays is how my wines are meant to have a historical point of reference, and how hopefully they get the fact that it's a continuation on certain historical themes in the wine industry.
Any new releases coming out soon? Or
new releases,
let people know where they can get the wines or follow what
I make my wines in two different purpose-driven categories. So like wholesale and then the tasting room. And the tasting room gets the weirdest, most existentially questioning my acumen as a business person wines of like, hey, this could be cool. So the new stuff coming out of there is going to be the Amaro and there's a couple new orange wines that are being released on a more Alsatian bend, like a Pinot Blanc and a couple others. And then on the wholesale side, there's going to be more sparklers. It's more on the lines of this, more skin contact. Like the new vintage of the sparkling Zinfandel Lambrusco style is coming out under a slightly different It's not quite an ancestral method sparkler.
Okay.
It's like a bastardized ancestral method.
Okay.
And newer vintages the Zinfandel is just a constantly evolving thing, and that hits wholesale. So it's there's always a slight variation of technique that I'm doing with that vintage to vintage.
Yeah.
So those are the new wines in the near future coming out.
Okay.
Down the line, hopefully a Shannon.
Yeah. And how are people able to find them?
A lot of local markets in SF and Berkeley. That's where I have the bigger presence, and hopefully soon talking to some people on the East Coast again. So Florida and the Mid-Atlantic, DC area.
Nice. Have you noticed any interest from other Portuguese heavy areas in the U.S., Massachusetts, or anything?
I would love that. I have tried a couple times, and I think it hasn't been until now that my price points have been able to get to a place that like kind of fit those regional markets. So I'm going to be attempting again. Yeah. My in-laws are all over there, so any excuse to be able to go out and visit them would be pretty awesome if I could. Two birds with one stone kind of a thing. But yeah, and I love that part of the country. But Hawaii, for people that don't know, Hawaii and Massachusetts are the largest Portuguese populations outside of California and Portugal. And they're both awesome areas. So I'm very open to working with people there. Yeah.
Thanks for listening to our episode today. David is super thoughtful when discussing his wines and the ideas behind them and where he wants to take them. Winery is open for tastings on Saturdays and is located near Gilman Street in Berkeley, next to many of the other small wineries. You can follow the Instagram at Lusu Cellars, or go to the website to learn more or get some wines, lusucellars.com. You can follow the podcast on wherever you're listening and the Instagram at Indie Wine Podcast. Feel free to email indiewinepodcast@gmail.com with comments, questions, or feedback. If you could tell your wine friends about the podcast too and help spread the word, I'd really appreciate it. Rating or subscribing helps a lot also. There's also now a Patreon set up if you feel like supporting the podcast monetarily to hopefully allow for more episodes, more travel, and to help defray some other costs. The link is in the show notes. We'll be back soon with another episode. Have a good one.